The sky above New Terra was gray again. It always was. Thick smoke from the factories covered the light, and the streets below smelled of metal and dust. Elias Carter sat by the cracked window of his tiny apartment, watching the world move slowly outside. The noise of air shuttles passing over his head was constant, but his mind was far away, buried in memories he wished to forget. He lived alone. No family, no friends, just him and the empty silence of his room. Every morning he woke up, made a cup of bitter synth coffee, and stared at the same old photo hanging on the wall, a faded picture of his old squad from the human Wolfkin War. Their faces smiled back at him, but most of them were gone now, dead, lost, or broken like him. The war had ended 12 years ago, but the wounds never really closed. The peace treaty between humans and the Wolfkin was fragile, built more on exhaustion than forgiveness. People said the fighting stopped, but hate still lived quietly in heart, hiding, waiting. Elias had been part of it all. He had seen the blood, the screams, the destruction. He had done things he never wanted to remember. Sometimes at night he would wake up sweating, hearing voices from the battlefield, the sound of blasters, the cries of dying soldiers, the roar of Wolfkin warriors. He would reach for his scarred arm, where a piece of shrapnel had nearly killed him, and remind himself that he was still alive. Though he often wondered why. That morning was quiet. Too quiet. He was halfway through his cold coffee when it happened. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, heavy knocks, not like a neighbor or a friend. It was firm, almost military. Elias froze. No one ever came to his door. His heart began to race. Maybe it was the landlord again, or worse, the local enforcers checking on veterans. But something about that sound was different. It carried authority and danger. He stood up slowly, his hands trembling as he approached the door. "Who is it?" he called out. A deep, steady voice replied from the other side. "Officer Ray of the United Coalition Patrol." "Elias Carter, may I have a moment?" The voice was calm but strong. Elias's stomach twisted. "Coalition Patrol?" That was the new peacekeeping force, a mix of humans and Wolfkin officers. The idea of a Wolfkin knocking on his door made his blood run cold. He hadn't spoken to one since the war. He didn't want to. He hesitated. What do you want?" "It's about the Battle of Arden Ridge," the voice said. Elias's breath stopped. The name alone brought back fire and screams. He could almost smell the smoke again, feel the heat of explosions. That battle had changed everything. The day his unit fell, the day he lost his closest friend. He had tried to bury it deep, but the past never stayed buried. Slowly, he unlocked the door. When it slid open, the hallway light spilled in, and there she was. A tall figure, nearly 2 meters, stood in full armor that shimmered faintly under the flickering light. She was not human. Her fur was silver gray with darker streaks running down her arms, her ears pointed high, her eyes glowing a soft gold. A Wolfkin, one of the very beings humans once called beasts. Her presence filled the room with tension and something Elias couldn't name. "Elias Carter?" she asked, her voice low and respectful. He nodded stiffly, unable to speak. "I am Officer Ray," she continued. "I need to talk to you. May I come in?" For a long moment, Elias just stared at her. His instinct screamed to shut the door. But there was something in her tone, not anger, not command, something calm, almost gentle. Against his better judgment, he stepped aside. She entered silently, her boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. Elias noticed the mark on her shoulder plate, the insignia of the United Coalition. It was strange to see a Wolfkin wearing that symbol, one that once represented his enemies. Ray looked around the small, messy room, the old tools, the broken photo frame, the lonely chair. "You live alone," she said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Elias replied, his voice flat. "That's how I prefer it." She nodded slowly, then turned her golden eyes toward him. "I know this is unexpected," she said, "but I'm here for something important. It's about what happened at Ardent Ridge and what you did there." Elias felt his chest tighten. "That was a long time ago," he muttered. "Nothing good came from it." "Maybe not for you," she said quietly. "But for me, it meant everything." He frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" Ray looked straight into his eyes. "You saved a Wolfkin child that day, the cadet trapped in the fire. That child was me." The world seemed to stop. Elias could only stare at her, his mind spinning. The smoke, the screams, the small figure he had pulled from the rubble, it all came rushing back. He remembered her eyes, terrified, yet alive. Now those same eyes were standing in front of him, not a child anymore, but a soldier. The silence between them was heavy, filled with the ghosts of the past. And as Elias finally found his voice, one thought echoed in his mind. The day a Wolfkin officer knocked on his door was the day his life would change forever. Elias stood frozen for a long moment. He could hardly believe what he had just heard. The Wolfkin officer standing in front of him, calm, tall, with golden eyes full of quiet strength, was the same child he had saved 12 years ago on a burning battlefield. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. His throat felt dry. The past he had buried so deep was standing right in front of him, breathing, alive. Ray waited patiently, her tail moving slightly behind her as she watched him. There was no pride or arrogance in her gaze, only something soft, respect, maybe even gratitude. Finally, Elias managed to whisper, "That was you?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, you pulled me out of the wreckage of a burning crawler. You were injured, but you still carried me through the fire." Her words hit him like a wave. He remembered that night, the chaos, the screams, the air thick with smoke. He remembered seeing a small Wolfkin cadet trapped beneath metal debris, crying for help. Everyone around him had told him to leave her. "She's the enemy," they said. "Save your own men." But he couldn't. She had been just a child. He had risked his life to save her and thought she had died later in the medbay. "I thought you didn't make it," he said, his voice shaking. "I saw the camp burn afterward. I thought everyone was gone." Ray's ears lowered slightly. "Many were, but I survived. The medics found me hours later. I was unconscious, but your identification tag was still in my hand." Elias blinked, shocked. "My tag?" "Yes. You gave it to me so I wouldn't be afraid," she said softly. "You told me to hold it and remember that not all humans were monsters." Elias sat down heavily on the old chair, his head spinning. He had forgotten that moment completely, but hearing her speak brought it all back. The young cadet's frightened eyes, the trembling hands, the burning rubble all around them. Ray took a step closer. "I've been searching for you for years," she said. "When I joined the United Coalition Patrol, I promised myself that if I ever found the human who saved me, I would thank him face to face." Elias gave a bitter laugh. "Thank me for what?" "The war destroyed everything. I couldn't save anyone else. My friends died. My family turned their backs on me when they learned I saved an enemy. You shouldn't thank me. You should hate me." Her expression didn't change, but her eyes softened. "I could never hate the one who gave me a chance to live. You saw me as more than a Wolfkin. You saw me as a child." Elias looked away, guilt rising in his chest. "You don't understand. I did terrible things too, things I can't forgive myself for." Ray walked to the window, looking out at the dim city below. "We all carry scars, Elias. Some on our skin, some in our hearts. But scars are proof we survived. You saved me, and because of that I became a soldier who believes peace can exist." Her voice was calm but full of emotion. Elias had never heard a Wolfkin speak like that, not with hatred but with hope. It confused him, yet something inside him began to shift. He sighed and looked at her. "Peace, huh? That's a word I stopped believing in a long time ago." She turned back to him, her eyes glowing faintly in the low light. "Then maybe it's time you start again." The room went quiet for a moment. The hum of the city outside seemed distant now. Elias studied her calm posture, the discipline in her every move, the scars on her face. She had grown strong, but there was still warmth beneath all that armor. "I don't even know what to say," he murmured. "You don't have to say anything," she replied gently. "You already did enough 12 years ago. I just wanted you to know that your act of kindness changed someone's life. Mine." Those words hit Elias deep. No one had ever said something like that to him. For years he had felt useless, unwanted, just another broken veteran trying to disappear. But hearing that he had changed someone's life, especially someone from the other side, made his heart ache in a way he didn't expect. Ray turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "I'm stationed nearby for a few days," she said. "If you ever wish to talk, I'll be here." Elias didn't answer. He just watched her walk away. her silver fur catching the dim light as the door slid shut behind her. The silence returned, but it felt different now. Heavier, yet somehow alive. He looked at the old photo of his squad again, then at his scarred hands. For the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone. Somewhere deep inside, a tiny spark lit up, the kind of warmth he thought he'd lost forever. And as he sat there in the quiet room, Elias whispered to himself, maybe peace isn't dead after all. Elias woke the next morning to the same gray light filtering through his dusty window. The city outside seemed unchanged, dull, lifeless, and endless. Yet inside him something had shifted. The knock of Officer Ray the day before lingered in his mind like a spark refusing to die. He had tried to return to his usual routine, but his thoughts kept wandering to the tall, silver-furred Wolfkin who had entered his life so suddenly. He made his usual bitter coffee and stared at the steaming mug, thinking about the girl he had saved years ago, the same girl who now stood before him as a soldier. The memory of her small, terrified eyes in the fire returned vividly, and guilt rose in his chest again. So much had been lost since that day. Friends, comrades, pieces of himself he would never recover. A soft knock on the door broke his thoughts. Elias froze. His heart raced. Could it really be her again? Yes, he called out cautiously. May I come in? Ray's voice was calm, but this time there was a hint of warmth in it. Elias hesitated, then slowly opened the door. She stepped inside, helmet off now, revealing her sharp golden eyes and the faint scar running across her left cheek. I thought I might find you here, she said softly. I wanted to speak with you, if you are willing. Elias gestured toward the chair. Sit, he said quietly. I don't know what we can say. Ray sat, folding her long legs neatly. Her presence filled the small room, but it didn't feel threatening. Instead, it was calming. The kind of calm that made Elias realize how hollow his life had been without connection. You carry a heavy weight, she said gently, her gaze fixed on him. I can see it in your eyes. Elias let out a bitter laugh. That's one way to put it. I lost so much in that war. Friends, family, a life I thought I could live. And for what? For saving me, Ray said quietly. Her words cut through the silence, gentle but firm. That one act mattered. It changed a life, mine. He looked away, ashamed. It doesn't feel like enough. I've done terrible things too. I can't even forgive myself for some of them. Ray leaned forward slightly. We all carry our scars, Elias. Some are physical, some are in our hearts. But scars remind us that we survived. You survived. And because of you, I survived. That is no small thing. Elias felt something stir inside him. Something he hadn't felt in years. Hope? Maybe. Or perhaps it was the relief of finally being seen, not as a soldier or a killer, but as a human who had made a difference. I don't know if you understand, he whispered. I spent years hiding from people, from the world, even from myself. I thought if I avoided everyone, maybe the pain would go away. But it never did, Ray nodded. Pain doesn't disappear, Elias, but it can guide us if we let it. You were brave enough to act when others would not. That bravery isn't erased by the horrors you faced afterward. He swallowed hard, fighting the lump in his throat. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not his superiors, not his friends, not even his family. They had only demanded more, expected him to endure more, and then left him alone. Ray's voice softened. You might think you are broken, but your actions have meaning. You are more than your mistakes. You are more than your regrets. Elias shook his head slowly, tears welling in his eyes. I don't know if I can believe that anymore. Maybe you don't have to believe it yet, Ray replied. Maybe you just need to accept it. She paused and studied him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. The world is cruel, Elias, but there are moments of light, moments that remind us why we survive. You were my light. For the first time in years, Elias felt a trembling warmth inside. It was fragile, like a candle flickering against the dark. But it was there. He had spent so long punishing himself for surviving, for living, for making choices that others condemned. And now, for the first time, someone was telling him that his survival, his actions, had real value. I don't know what to say, he admitted quietly. You don't have to say anything, Ray said. I just wanted you to know the truth. You saved a life. You made a difference. And that difference lives on. The room was silent again, but this time it felt lighter. Elias looked at Ray. really looked at her, not as a Wolfkin, not as an officer, but as someone who had survived, someone who had chosen to return to him. And in that silence, Elias realized something he had not felt in a long time. He was not alone. Not anymore. The knock of her presence yesterday had opened a door, not just into his apartment but into his heart. And for the first time in years, he felt the fragile stirrings of hope. The days after Ray's visit passed strangely for Elias. The gray skies of New Terra seemed less heavy, yet the city's streets remained cold and silent. He went about his routine, but his mind was restless. He found himself thinking constantly about the Wolfkin officer, the girl he had saved years ago, and the way her golden eyes had carried both gratitude and quiet strength. For the first time in over a decade, he felt noticed, truly noticed. Then one evening, another knock came. Elias's heart skipped. It was Ray again. This time she did not enter with hesitation. She carried a small metal cube in her hands, its surface polished and humming faintly with a soft light. "I brought this for you," she said. She placed the cube on the table, and it projected a holographic display into the room. Images floated in mid-air. Human engineers and Wolfkin soldiers working together, repairing damaged ships, rebuilding broken colonies. Flags waved in unison. People laughed. Children ran through open fields. The display showed a world Elias had long thought impossible. "This is the United Coalition Peace Force," Ray explained. "Our mission is to build something that should have existed long ago. A world where humans and Wolfkin live together, side by side. We fight not just for survival, but for a future where peace is possible." Elias stared at the projection, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He had not seen anything like it before. The war had taught him only one thing: destruction. But here was proof that the world could be different. Proof that his actions could mean more than survival or guilt. I don't know if I can do that," Elias admitted. "I haven't done anything good in years. I can't even trust myself to help anyone." Ray tilted her head slightly, her golden eyes steady. "You don't have to trust yourself yet. You only need to remember that you saved a life once. You carried someone through fire while others ran. That courage doesn't disappear." Her words struck him deeply. Memories of the battlefield, the fire, the screaming, the small cadet clinging to him, returned. The pain, the fear, the chaos, all of it came back, but this time it was accompanied by something else. A sense of purpose he had not felt since before the war. You think I can be part of this?" he asked quietly. "I don't think," Ray said, firm and unwavering. "I know. You were trained to solve problems, to fix what is broken. The Coalition needs people like you, people who remember why the war must never happen again." Elias swallowed, feeling a lump in his throat. His mind raced. Could he really step back into a world he had abandoned? Could he risk being seen again after all these years? And yet, as he looked at Ray, at the scars, the determination, the unwavering trust, something inside him stirred. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. Ray smiled faintly, a soft warmth in her expression. "First, you need to understand why we fight. Not just for borders or power, but for people, for those who cannot fight for themselves. And second, you need to remember that even small acts matter. You saved me once. Now maybe it's time to save more." Elias leaned back in his chair, letting the words sink in. For so long he had felt powerless, lost, a ghost drifting through a world that had forgotten him. And now a Wolfkin, the very being he had once risked his life for, was asking him to join a cause that could truly change the galaxy. He looked at the holographic display again. He saw soldiers, engineers, and children, humans and Wolfkin side by side, building rather than destroying. It was almost unreal. But for the first time, Elias allowed himself to hope that something good could exist in this broken world. Ray stood, her posture commanding yet calm. "You don't have to decide today," she said. "But know this, when you're ready, we will be here. The world needs people who can remember the past and still choose to build the future." Elias nodded slowly, a mix of fear and determination rising inside him. He looked at his scarred hands, at the remnants of a life spent running from himself. And then he looked at Ray, the Wolfkin officer who had returned to his life like a message from the past, reminding him that courage and hope were never truly lost. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility of purpose. The possibility of redemption. The possibility that his life, broken as it seemed, could matter. And in the quiet of his small apartment, Elias Carter made the first choice he had truly made in a long time, to face the world again, not as a ghost of the past, but as someone who could help shape the future. The hum of the cube faded, leaving only silence, but that silence was no longer empty. It was full of possibility, and for Elias it was the beginning of something he never thought he would find again: hope. The days that followed were quiet but tense. Elias had returned to his old routines, but the spark Ray had lit inside him refused to fade. He began walking through the city streets more often, observing the small acts of life that still existed: vendors shouting their prices, children chasing each other in the alleys, the faint laughter of neighbors in broken apartments. It was a fragile world, scarred by war yet still breathing. Ray visited often. They spoke for hours about the past, about battles, about the choices they had made and the lives they had lost. Elias found himself opening up in ways he had not in over a decade. For the first time he laughed again. A short, cautious laugh that startled him with its warmth. And for the first time he allowed himself to feel like a human being rather than a ghost of his former life. But peace is never without its shadows. One evening, as the orange light of the setting sun flickered across the city's skyline, Elias was tuning an old communications array when a loud explosion shook the nearby streets. Dust and smoke filled the alleyways and screams echoed from the buildings below. He rushed to the window and saw a small building burning. A message appeared across the local news feed, projected in flashing red letters: "No wolves among men. All peacekeepers will fall." Elias felt a chill run down his spine. The old hatred that had never truly disappeared had returned. People still feared the Wolfkin, and extremists who refused to accept the fragile peace were making their presence known, violently. Within minutes, Ray's hover vehicle landed outside his building. She ran up the stairs, armor scorched and dented, her golden eyes wide with urgency. Elias opened the door to her, seeing her breath come in quick bursts. "They targeted the southern colony," she said. "The extremists are attacking human and Wolfkin citizens alike. They want war again. They want to destroy everything we've worked for." Elias felt anger rising in his chest, mixed with fear. "Then why are they coming here?" "Why now?" "They've been waiting for the right moment," Ray replied. "When people started believing peace was possible, they struck. They want to break that hope." The weight of her words pressed heavily on Elias. The world he had just begun to see as hopeful was once again on the brink of chaos. His mind flashed to the images Ray had shown him: the coalition rebuilding damaged colonies, children playing safely, humans and Wolfkin working side by side. Could it all be destroyed before it even had a chance to grow? "I can't let them win," he said through gritted teeth. Ray placed a hand on his shoulder, surprisingly gentle for her size. "You don't have to do it alone. That's why I came to you. You are part of this now, Elias. You can help protect what we're building." For the first time, Elias felt that surge of purpose he had almost forgotten. The fear of the past still lingered, but it no longer paralyzed him. He would not run. He would not hide. They moved quickly. Ray called for backup while Elias accessed the city's surveillance system. Through the flickering screens, he saw groups of extremists planting explosives, surrounding shelters and terrorizing citizens. Rage burned in him, but so did resolve. "We have to stop them," he said, "before more people get hurt." Ray nodded, her golden eyes glowing brighter in the dim room. "We will. Together." As they prepared, Elias realized something profound. This was more than a battle for survival. It was a fight for hope, for the fragile beginnings of a future he had almost given up on. And he was not alone. He had Ray by his side, the very life he had once saved now returning to guide him. The sun set completely, leaving the city in shadows. But Elias no longer feared the dark. The shadow of the past had returned, yes, but he was ready to face it. He had a purpose. He had a reason to fight, and for the first time in years he believed that maybe, just maybe, humanity and Wolfkin could truly live together. As the distant sound of explosions echoed through the city, Elias tightened his fists. The battle ahead would not be easy, but this time he was not alone, and together they would stand against the darkness. The night was thick and heavy over New Terra. Smoke from the recent attacks curled in the air, carrying the stench of fire and metal. Elias stood beside Ray atop a damaged rooftop, their eyes scanning the darkened streets below. He could hear distant shouts, the crackle of gunfire, and the faint rumble of explosions. The extremists were organized, determined, and ruthless. But he no longer felt the paralyzing fear he had known all his life. Ray turned toward him, her golden eyes steady. "We can't wait for backup to arrive," she said. "They'll strike again before anyone can respond. We have to act now." Elias nodded, swallowing the tight knot in his chest. "I'm with you," he said quietly. His voice sounded stronger than he expected, carrying a resolve he hadn't felt in years. They moved through the alleyways silently, shadows among shadows. Elias adjusted his worn tactical gear, his hand steady despite the pounding of his heart. For so long he had lived in fear, hiding from the ghosts of the past. Tonight he would face them. The extremist hideout was a crumbling warehouse at the edge of the colony. Smoke rose from broken windows and flickering lights revealed armed figures moving inside. Ray crouched beside him, tail flicking slightly, her ears alert.
"Follow my lead," she whispered.
"Stay close and trust me." Elias nodded, gripping his old combat rifle. Memories of battle returned, the heat, the screams, the weight of responsibility. But this time he felt ready. Not as a broken man, not as a ghost, but as someone who could make a difference. Together they entered the warehouse. Ray moved first, swift and precise. Her claws scraped lightly against the metal floor. And Elias marveled at her control. She neutralized two guards silently, her movements fluid and deadly. Elias watched and learned, taking down another extremist with careful aim. Inside, the extremists had rigged explosives near the storage of humanitarian supplies. Food, water, medical kits. Elias's stomach tightened. These supplies were vital to the colony's survival. He couldn't let them be destroyed. "Help me disable them," Ray said, pointing to the first device. Elias knelt beside the blinking cube, his fingers trembling as he worked the wires. Sweat ran down his forehead, but he forced himself to focus. Every instinct, every memory from his past life as a tactical engineer guided his hands. He cut one wire, then another. The device's light blinked slower, then stopped. Ray watched, her golden eyes approving. "Good," she whispered. Now the others. They moved quickly, disabling the remaining explosives one by one. Meanwhile, the extremists realized they were being attacked. Alarm sirens blared and gunfire erupted. Ray fought with precision, her movements a mix of strength and grace, while Elias provided cover and neutralized threats with calculated shots. Hours or maybe minutes. He couldn't tell, passed in a blur of chaos. Smoke filled the warehouse. Flames licked the walls, and the sound of metal striking metal echoed endlessly. Yet through it all, Elias felt alive in a way he hadn't in years. Every heartbeat, every breath, every careful movement mattered. Finally, the last extremist fell. The warehouse was quiet, broken and scorched, but alive. The humanitarian supplies were intact. Elias and Ray leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, faces covered in soot and sweat. "You did well," Ray said softly, her hand resting on his shoulder. "You were brave. Not just today, but all these years. You just didn't see it before." Elias shook his head, a tired but genuine smile forming. I don't know if I could have done it alone," he admitted. "You didn't have to," Ray replied. "That's the difference between fear and purpose. You fought not just for survival, but for something that matters." He looked at her, feeling a surge of gratitude and connection. She had saved him once in ways he hadn't realized. She had returned hope to a life he had thought was over. And now together they had saved not just themselves, but hundreds of others. The night outside seemed less oppressive. The smoke lingered, but it no longer felt like the end of the world. Elias stood, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. The pain of the past remained, but it no longer defined him. Ray placed her hand on his arm, her gaze steady and warm. "This is only the beginning," she said. "We have work to do. Many people are still in danger, but together, we can make a difference." Elias nodded, determination filling his chest. "Then let's make sure they know hope isn't gone." And in that moment, amidst the fire, the chaos, and the shadows of hatred, Elias realized that the life he thought was broken had found new meaning. The past was behind him, but the future, uncertain, fragile, and full of possibility, waited. He and Ray would face it together. The sun rose slowly over New Terra, painting the city in soft shades of gold and orange. Smoke still lingered in the air, but it felt different now, lighter, almost cleansing. The streets were beginning to hum with cautious life again. Vendors setting up stalls, children laughing as they chased each other through alleys, workers repairing broken buildings. Elias stood on the edge of a rooftop, looking at the city he had almost stopped believing in. Ray stood beside him, her arm in a sling from the fight the night before. Her fur was still dusted with ash and her golden eyes glimmered in the sunlight. "They're calling you a hero," she said quietly, a soft smile tugging at her lips. Elias let out a small laugh, shaking his head. "I'm no hero. I'm just tired of being a ghost." "You're more than a ghost," Ray said, her voice steady. "You were lost, yes. But you found purpose again. You reminded people, and me, what it means to care." He looked at her. Really looked. The same Wolfkin cadet he had saved all those years ago now stood as a soldier, a protector, a beacon of hope. And somehow, through her courage and her trust in him, Elias felt like he had been given a second chance at life. The city below was alive with the quiet sounds of rebuilding. Humans and Wolfkin worked side by side, carrying supplies, repairing structures, and helping those in need. For Elias, it was almost surreal. He had spent so long in fear, alone and broken, believing that peace was impossible, and yet here it was. Fragile, yet undeniably real. Ray turned to him, tail flicking slightly. "You could stay here, Elias, watch the city, help where you can. But I want you to know something. The coalition isn't just about soldiers. It's about people who remember the past and want a better future. People who fight for hope, not just survival." He nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words sink in. For years he had blamed himself, thinking he was unworthy, that the world would never need him again. But now he understood survival was not enough. To matter, one had to act, to stand, to care. I think I want that," he said finally. "I want to help build something that matters. Even if it's small. Even if it's just one step." Ray's eyes softened, her gaze filled with quiet pride. "Then let's take that first step together." They descended from the rooftop, walking side by side through streets that smelled of smoke and hope. Everywhere they passed, people looked up at them, some with cautious trust, others with curious hope. It was strange for Elias to realize that the same city that had felt cold and lifeless could now carry warmth, if only for those willing to see it. As they reached the edge of the central plaza, Ray paused. "Do you remember the day I was trapped?" she asked softly. Elias looked at her, the memory sharp in his mind. The fire, the rubble, the small, trembling cadet in his arms. "Yes," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I remember everything." "I want you to remember this too," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You saved me, Elias, and in saving me you helped build the future we fight for now. You matter more than you realize." For the first time, Elias felt tears prick at his eyes. Not from pain, but from relief, from gratitude, from the overwhelming weight of hope. He had been lost for so long, trapped in memories of failure and guilt. And now, here he was, alive, needed, and ready to step forward into a future he could help shape. The sun rose higher, casting light on the streets, the people, and the small acts of kindness unfolding everywhere. Elias and Ray stood together, two survivors from opposite sides of a brutal war, watching as the city began to heal. "This is only the beginning," Ray said quietly. Elias nodded, his heart steady and strong for the first time in years. "Then let's make sure it's a good beginning," he said. And in that moment, amid the ruins of the past and the fragile dawn of a new day, Elias Carter finally believed in something he had thought impossible. A world where humans and Wolfkin could live together, where hope could rise from the ashes of hate, and where one act of courage, and even from a broken man, could change the course of a life, a city, and maybe even a world. The day a Wolfkin officer knocked on his door had changed everything. And now, Elias was ready to change everything too.